Hello, I'm Daniela. Now I normally post videos on sewing, either sewing techniques or slow stitching videos with projects. But today's video is about a tool that we're going to make to use for our slow stitching, or really any stitching. It's called a needle minder, and it's a removable tool. It's totally temporary that you can put on your work, whether you're using an embroidery hoop or just some fabric. You can even use it for mending a pair of jeans or a shirt. So you're using two magnets to hold the needle minder together on whatever stitching piece you're using. So it can work in an embroidery hoop or a pair of jeans that you're mending, or even just some plain fabric that you're slow stitching. It's temporary, so you can use it on any piece, moving it from piece to piece, and you use whatever little objects you have for the top of it. And I'll give you some ideas in the video. I show how to make a few and how to modify some objects you have around your house to use at the top of your needle minder. Now here's my process.
So this is why you'd use a needle minder. It's certainly not required. When you're doing your stitching and you have to stop for whatever reason, typically I would just pin my needle in place, and that way I don't lose it and it reduces the chance of me being poked with it. But the needle is exposed and I've added additional holes to my work. A needle minder is just a little tool here with two magnets, one attached to the surface and a spare. And so if I just put my spare magnet on the back and then I find and match it with the needle minder, instead of pinning my needle into my work, I can just drop it. And because of being a metal needle, it will find its way to that magnet and it stays in place. It's also handy because in case I do drop my needle on my floor, all I have to do is take that magnet and I can usually find that needle pretty easily. So it's multi-purpose. Now to make a needle finder, you can use a lot of different objects you might already own. So here I have a bunch that I've made, including this one with a little cupcake on it. They all attach the same way with the magnets on the back, as you can see here. And I used different types of magnets, basically just by the size for the piece I need. Now the one thing to consider when you find an object to use to make your needle minder is just to double check that you actually have that connection with that needle and that magnet. So you want to make sure your magnet is big enough and strong enough to hold your needle, and that your piece that you're using as your top piece will actually allow that magnetic reaction to occur. So sometimes if it's too thick, you won't get that magnetic reaction. And also you want something relatively flat. So sometimes if you use buttons that are curved, they may not work, and I'll show you what to look for. So if I take my fabric out of the embroidery hoop, we can look at everything nice and flat. Now, this is just a standard plastic button, and what I did was I took the button and I attached a piece of paper, just a little piece of cardstock to the back of the button, just so that my glue wouldn't come through these little holes. And then on top of that, I used some glue and one of the magnets. If you notice, this button is nice and flat. So this button would work pretty well. It's a nice flat button. And so I have my magnets here. So if I hold my magnets underneath my button, I can see if that magnetic reaction will work with my needle. And so it does. So this is a really good contender. And this is also a good size magnet. Now I could always use a larger magnet as well. Really just whatever I want. The larger the magnet, the better. It just holds better. There's also some small magnets that are super magnetic. You have to be careful if you don't put them near your credit card or different appliances. And because the magnet is so strong, that works just as beautifully, even on something so little. Now this is the rounded button that I was discussing, and sometimes it's hard to really get that magnet to stay pretty well. And in addition, it's hard to get your needle to really adhere. So that might not be the greatest button to use for this task. If you have a button here with a shank, like this one, it can be used, just takes a little more work. What you'll want to do is cut off that shank and then sand it down to make it flat. But it's a very pretty button, and I think I might use this. It's a nice, attractive little needle minder. Here I have just this little wooden sign And I attached this long magnet because it fits so well. It's a two-part magnet. And so one part I attached, as you can see, it holds pretty well. I attached to this little wooden sign, and then I have my spare that I use on my work. And as you can hear, it attaches quite well. Here I have a decorative button. I have a little embroidery floss holder, which I have another one here that I can use. And this one is just a little sloth. So I would take my magnet and just adhere it to the back. Again, making sure that it attaches, and it does. Now this one is a little awkward shaped, and I'd have to add a second button, and I really don't want to have too many buttons on the back. But if this was something that I really wanted to use, I would use it that way. I'm a big avid tennis player, and so I have a lot of these little vibration dampeners. They're little two-part pieces that are connected in the center, and you put them between the strings of your racket, and it stops the racket from vibrating. But it also makes really cute little needle minders. This cupcake one, for example, here's the second part to that. And all I did was take an X-Acto knife and cut right in between the center, so I have a flat edge, and I use that as the top of my needle minder, so I could do that as well. This was a charm from a purse, and again, this would work just as easily. I just find the right size magnet to use on the back, and I have a cute little enamel needle minder. This is a bead, and it's a very pretty decorative bead, and I think this would be pretty striking as a needle minder. So again, it's pretty thick, so I want to just make sure it would work, and it does. So that's another option. If you don't have any of these things for whatever reason, you can try to do something like I did here. So I just had some watercolor paintings, and I cut them out with a circle cutter. So I have a little needle minder here, and the needle attaches very well to that. So I started to do that here, and I'll show you that process. So you can do this with any paper. I liked using my paintings because the watercolor paper is pretty secure and pretty thick already. So then I can just take my cutter, and you can use any shape you want, and I find the little shape that I want to cut and use in my work. So I will cut that, and that will be the top of my needle minder, but I want to make it a little more substantial. So I'll just come over here to the side of the paper and cut out 3 or 4 little pieces. And with this extra paper, I'll start to laminate it. So I just take some matte medium. You can use any type of glue. I put it down right on my paper here, and then I just dab it in. I'm trying to make a nice even thin coat. I don't want it to be too heavy or too thick, and I'll do this around a couple of pieces, and then I just combine them. And I can decide how many I want to use for the thickness of my piece. So I'll dab just a little bit more of this matte medium. And then I'll take that top piece and put it right on it. When I have it the way I want, I'll clamp it together. And let it dry for a few hours, just like this. And then it's ready to use, just as I would use to make a needle minder. So to make a needle minder, it's the same process whether you're using this piece, a bead, or the button, as long as you make that button flat. So all I'm going to do is take some E6000 glue. This is a nice thick glue. If you don't have this particular brand, just look for an industrial strength glue. I keep my buttons together because this way I know that they're together and I can see them. And then I take the glue and I find one side that I want to put it on. Now this bead is easy to use because both sides are the same. So I'll just take a peek and see if there's a side I like a little bit more than the other. And I'll put just a little dollop of glue. Now I'll make this one as well, just to show you that it's the same process. I put just a little dollop of glue there as well. Now to make this glue most effective, what you want to do is take your magnets and your bead, in this case with a dollop of glue, and I'll gently press them together, and then I pull them apart and I twist to really just get my magnet covered. And as you can see, the glue is very viscous. So I'm just going to set that aside for a moment and do the same thing here with my magnet for my little watercolor design. So again, I put the magnet down, twist it around, and then I just remove it. And this creates a nice strong bond. I'll just give it a few more seconds, and then I'll take the two and combine them one more time. And I'm pressing it down. Now this bead is not completely flat, as you can see, so I really want to make sure that I have it the exact way that I want it. And now I'm just going to set this aside, making sure it's exactly as I want, and I'll let that dry for 4 to 6 hours. Come over here to my watercolor design, and it's nice and flat, so I'll just do the same thing, just like that. Now here's a tip if you're going to make multiple needle minders. While they're drying, you want to keep those magnets from the separate needle minders separate. If you keep them together or even close together, the magnets will slowly draw themselves and they'll move on that glue until that glue is secure. So if you're making multiple of these, keep them really separate. And while they're drying, keep them away from other magnets as well. And that's how I make my needle minders.
So that's how I make a needle minder. Think of all the possibilities of all the little objects you have around their house that you can use for this project, like a guitar pick or even an old key. What do you use to make your needle minder? If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.